Because of this, you cannot hear me because my mic was not on.
Well, it's way down by your belly button.
Well, welcome everyone here in person, online. We're starting it. Okay, so I have some quick announcements and we'll move on. So, thank you, Bill.
Announce that they should bring
Yeah.
chairs next week.
Okay, I will do that, Bill. So, tomorrow we have a deep prayer / revival night at from 7 to 8 p.m. Then next Sunday, we have again it's written there, no regular church service. So we're not going to meet here next Sunday. We're going to be meeting at Auburn Memorial Park. We have picnic and baptism. Bring your chairs if you want to sit outside. There's a pavilion there where you can sit, but if you want to sit outside, bring your chair, lawn chairs, and we'll have plenty of food. If you want to bring friends, etc., you're welcome to. It's just a good time. They really spoil it there with different kinds of food. So I would suggest fast on Saturday and come hungry on Sunday, so that you know. So it starts. It's from 10 to 1:15. The event prep starts at 9:30. Clean up at 1:30. There's going to be baptism too, and I'm going to try to. So I'm going to probably set it up before I come to all those nonsense that because we're bringing a. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. Men's Fellowship, July 25th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. at Hodges, Mark 6. Women's Bible Study is going to resume on August 2nd at Winnie's place. Winnie is not here today, but she's going to be here next Sunday. How's that? And you can ask her too. Her phone number is on the church's directory if you have any questions or anything. Our other summer event is youth and kids. It's at the Works in Wyomissing, and bring a pair of socks with you. How's that? It's on August 9th, 5:30 to 7:30. Ends with pizza. If you have any prayer, send it to Irene. Irene's not here, but send it to Irene at prayer@newawakeningchurch.com. Thank you again for your service and for helping us set up. The Grasso kids today were, when they come, it's like things get much faster. So if you have not said hello to someone in a long time, please say hello and greet someone. We are a family. How's that? So this is from our Facebook. Going to read it quickly, and we're going to move on here. As we celebrate the 4th of July, let's reflect on the legacy that made America great. And what was that? It's love for Christ, for Jesus. Our forefathers stepped out in faith as they drafted the documents that mark us as a free nation under God. We're praying that America will return to its roots and once again remember that it is in Jesus that we find hope, prosperity, and freedom. Remember that if the Son doesn't set you free, you can never be free. No matter what institution, government you live, if you don't have Jesus inside, you're never free. But with Jesus, you can build a great society. Without Jesus, you can't. Because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is what? There is freedom. Well, just quick, I was going through my devotions this past week, and I was going through Revelation, and I found this passage. The Lord kind of revealed it to my heart. I read this passage so many times in my life, but I just felt it just kind of spoke to my heart, and I'm just going to 1 minute share it. It says, talks about the entire chapter 12. It talks about a spiritual battle that's happening, especially when Jesus was born, how the enemy was trying to kill. And you know what happened with Jesus' crucifixion and the resurrection, that there's a lot of then offspring that will come from Jesus. And so, but what happens there before, I never noticed this before, but prior to going to the events of the rise of the beast that's going to come for after this, it says this, that then the dragon was enraged, in other words, at the woman, and went off to wage war against what? The rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commandments and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. So in other words, what's happening is that the rise of the beast system, world order, and all of that struggles, etc., is done purposefully. There's a purpose on it that is done to destroy the offspring of Jesus' followers, in other words. So everything that the enemy does and is doing in the world, in the system, etc., with this and this and that, different ways, it is done directly against the offspring of those who are following the same steps as Jesus himself. And so even the rise of different world orders that are arising and going to arise, etc., it is done purposefully for destruction of the offspring. We are the offspring. We are the new Israel. We are the new Isaac. We are the new Jacob. We are the spiritual Israel. And so the only thing that is happening, all the systems and everything that will be set and are being set, comes directly against Jesus' system. And that's what really surprised me, to see that the beast and everyone who's following is being just deceived, and at the same time it's coming somehow against Jesus. Everything is being organized and will be organized to attack the offspring. Okay? And everything is done under the dragon, the serpent, hell himself. We're going to talk more about this in the future, but anyway, I thought just to wake you up a little bit. I'm not going to be talking today. Yes.
Maybe if you want to keep preaching, that's quite all right.
No, I just want to share that. Yeah, because I know some of the members were struggling this past week, and I just wanted to say that the enemy is after everyone. Yeah, so he's in the battle zone, and so when you experience trials like that, know that it is not uncommon. Miles, let's go ahead, Mr. Miles.
Are you sure?
100%.
I see that the word got out that I'm speaking today.
They cannot hear you online.
I don't care.
Go there.
Yeah, it's a history lesson. Yes.
Well,
All right.
it was because of the rain, Miles.
You're right.
No, I'm not kidding.
Okay.
There we go, Mr. Miles. Now remember, this is
It's
over.
10:23.
This
Okay.
is- You can remove this from here.
Yeah,
So this is
probably.
backwards. It's just telling me that it cannot go backwards.
You've already shown me this.
Okay, good. Now,
So you're right. Oh dear, a history lesson. Okay, and that's true. The idea was, 4th of July, or Thanksgiving. That's when we talk about the Puritans. 4th of July. Well, what do? We talk about the patriotic heroes, right? All right. Well, let's do that. Get out your note papers and pens, and please follow me. But this is also an opportunity to talk about a subject very dear to me, and that's faith versus reason. America was founded and developed through a constant battle between faith and reason. This has been, for us, constantly a challenge to make that choice. I picked out of all of the fathers of the revolution 2 individuals because they in some way represent very much both the duality of both reason and faith. Both good men, but both went at life very differently and produced different results. Okay? General George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. We know 4th of July. What happened especially on the 4th of July? The Declaration of Independence, right? So we must think the 4th of July is about the signing of the Declaration of Independence, right? Well, sort of right and sort of not quite accurate. Anyway, this is a picture of Jefferson, one of our 2 characters, heroes, whatever, presenting the first draft to Ben Franklin, and John Adams. John Adams was actually the head of the committee that was assigned the task of coming up with a explanation as to why it was the colonies were rising up in revolt against the king. This was something that was very dangerous, something unprecedented, or at least let's put it this way, unprecedented in the sense that it would ever succeed. You don't usually get away with that kind of stuff because the king will send his troops after you and put down all the rebels. So we were just basically declaring ourselves to be rebels. All right? Now, he's just submitting his draft to the commission on the 28th of June, and it would be deeply edited by both the committee and by the Continental Congress, who ultimately cut out about 1/4 of Jefferson's fine flourishings. It was a man of, Jefferson, a young guy at this point, a man of great eloquence, wordiness. He was my classic intellectual humanist with the so-called scientific mind, okay? And he's trying to prepare a document that will rank in fame along with some of the other famous documents like John Locke published it. This is his thing. And indeed, later, John Adams, who was the chairman of the committee that assigned Jefferson to come up with the draft, would very, very sad that he himself hadn't done that, because it becomes, strangely enough, something of enormous fame. But actually, at the time, it was not considered to be that significant. Here's the draft and all of the scratching throughs that Jefferson himself was forced to make. And the part that, how many of you had to actually memorize at least some of the lines of the Declaration of Independence? Most all of us. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator. That was an insertion that they forced Jefferson to accept. Now, he wasn't godless, but that just hadn't occurred to his mind that somehow that was relevant. They were endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sounds good. Pursuing happiness is a good thing. Yes, everybody agree? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. They're trying to explain, we're not waiting for the king to tell us what to do. We tell ourselves what we need to do. We are governed by our own ideas. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, that'd be George III and his behavior, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government laying the foundations of such prophecies, principles, I'm sorry, I can't see, I should probably be wearing my glasses. Principles and organizing its powers in such form as shall then seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Woo, 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 woo. Boy, that's a lot of fancy wording, yes? In other words, they have a right to rise up and revolt, okay? Boom. Then it listed 27 grievances explaining why independence from British royal rule was deemed necessary. One of the ones that got cut out was Jefferson explaining that slavery was somehow the byproduct, or at least the inability to get rid of the institution, which, by the way, he was a major slave owner himself, was the reluctance of George III to cooperate in this new campaign. Now, one of the things you're going to understand about Jefferson is he holds certain views and he holds certain actions, and they don't necessarily coincide. Man of great ideas, but not necessarily much follow-through, which is not uncommon among intellectuals. Okay? So was he in favor of slavery or opposed to slavery? Well, it just all depends. Okay? Just all depends? Wow. There's the actual declaration as we see it now, and it's posted as the 4th of July. Actually, the vote on it to approve the Lee resolution, which actually was the act of declaring independence, was on the 2nd of July. And it took finally Pennsylvania and South Carolina to agree to, because at first they were opposed to the idea of rebelling against the king. New York had to abstain because at this point New York is being occupied by the British troops. They're not in a position to, not yet, get instructions because their state government's in flight somewhere. Anyway, the actual signing of the Declaration was not the 4th of July either. In fact, it's piecemeal. Now, this is a great picture. It shows all of them gathered. You know, they're going to sign this on the 4th of July. Not exactly. In fact, the major signatures occurred on the 2nd of August, as they were led and able to come in and put their signatures on the bottom of that document. The document itself was probably written on the 4th of July under the instructions that somebody with great penmanship, not Jefferson, should actually write it. So that's what we've got. So the 4th of July, yeah, that kind of works, sort of. You understand what I'm saying? Because in my mind, any case, the real issue about the 4th of July wasn't about the document. It was about what was going on to make sure that this move to independence was real. And that takes us to Washington, who had nothing to do with the document. He was busy trying to keep his army, 9,000 men, from being overrun by 30,000 men that had encircled him and entrapped him in the Brooklyn Heights when he'd moved his troops there, expecting the Brits to come to New York, which he correctly figured that one out, because they were going to make New York City, in fact, British headquarters. And he manages to get the heck out of there by getting some of the local sailors to come and bring boats and start shipping them out by night. But they still weren't all of them out of there until the next morning. And then this fog comes in and allows him to complete the removal of his 9,000 troops, minus the group that was left behind to continue to appear to be still in action. They got captured. But he saved his army. And Washington knew that fog wasn't a coincidence. This is a man of faith, not a man of reason. There was no reason behind the fog showing up. Understood? I like to compare reason to the same thing of the men coming off the landing boats at Normandy Beach on June the 6th, 1944. This was not an event of reason. Whether you lived or died that day. So why are you doing it? You're doing it out of this larger conviction that you have been called to a greater purpose, and it may cost you your life. That ain't a real popular thing today to go run around, proclaiming and trying to get people to understand that there are calls by faith to higher purpose. We'll get to that in a bit. So anyway, so here's Washington. He manages to get his men out of this mess. Oops, wrong way. So anyway, today we celebrate the 4th of July as a matter of the signing of document, blah, blah, blah. We've already gone over that subject. Now, let's start talking about these two individuals, why they were different, and what it is they represent in terms of the political, cultural, spiritual dynamic of today. Okay? Now, I'm not, as you probably will figure out, I'm not a wild Jeffersonian supporter. He wasn't all bad. I don't mean that. It's just that he chose to go at things in a way I can understand, because I was the same way myself when I was a university professor. This is the earliest portrait we have of him. He's age, I think, 44 at that point. And at that point, he is the American delegate, part of the representation of America in the French court after the War of Independence succeeded. This is when we're trying to get our act together after the war. I just mentioned that because that's the earliest picture we have of him. He is a great French lover. Oh my goodness. While he's in France, he develops and cultivates a love of wine, nearly bankrupted him trying to ship back all of his wine to his home in Monticello. And look at him, he's trying to look as French as possible. He got rid of the red hair. White hair? Hey, fashion man. Okay?
Not so much.
Not so much. Yeah, not so much. Okay, here's the long list of things he did. Wow. Okay, 1759, he went off to College of William and Mary, which was the counterpart to Harvard in New England. That was the Southerners' Harvard, which took almost a century after Harvard, though, to be put in place. And it was very much Church of England, as Virginia was very much Church of England. Everything was built around the idea of the monarchy, the church, the bishops, archbishops, the lords and the barons, and such and such and such. And that was what you were supposed to learn and come fit yourself into. And Jefferson was very, very well born and studied all of the classics at William and Mary. He was only there 2 years before he was able to take up the study of law and become soon thereafter admitted to the bar of. That's not a place where you drink beer. He's become a lawyer in Virginia. Very soon thereafter, and he's quite young, as you can picture, he's a representative to the Virginia House of Burgesses, which was expected of him as a man of, genteel background, aristocratic background. He marries in 1772 Martha Wales, who only survives him by 10 years. Poor girl. She had 6 kids, and it really just did her in, plus her diabetes. And so she died, and only 2 of their 6 kids even survived to adulthood, and even one of those was to die very soon thereafter. It was a tragic, and it left Jefferson, as you can imagine, disconsolate. For a long time there, he couldn't figure out which end was up in life, and I understand that. In 1775, as things are starting to heat up over this issue with George, he is sent as a Virginia representative to the Second Continental Congress, which is gathered in Philadelphia to figure out what the heck these colonies in a united way are supposed to do in response to the clear effort of George III to impose his royal will on a much too independent-minded set of colonies. He's just not going to have this. It's dangerous stuff, especially for the folks back in England. They might get the wrong ideas watching these Americans self-govern Self-governed? No. Well, so he's a representative. Jumping on ahead, 1779, war is full in force at that point. He's elected twice as one-year term each as governor of Virginia. This should have put him a little closer to the actual political action that was going on, but he spent most of his time running from the British who were trying to chase him down. That's not exactly Washington's profile. That's Jefferson's profile. He, at one point, took his cabinet up to Monticello. They lived well, out of the range of the... And, of course, it didn't go sit well with the Virginian delegation. So he did not, after that, he did not get reelected to the governorship. Well, okay. That was probably wise of Virginia. He was not a great governor. And they did, however, send him to the post. By this time, America is independent. The British have consented to allow the colonies to go free by way of the Treaty of Paris. And he is, once again, a delegate, a representative, again, because of his background, not because of his great heroics or anything, but his background still is important in the eyes of Virginians to the new Confederation Congress. The Confederation now is a grouping of the different states as they try at this point to continue their union, even though they no longer have a single goal, which was fighting off George III anymore. It's going to be tricky keeping this union together. Remember, they were independent colonies. They were separate, like El Salvador and Honduras and Nicaragua. And these were, each one of them was a very independent political entity. Now, that raises some interesting questions. They can unite fighting off George III, but are they going to stay united or not? Tricky question. We kind of lose focus of the fact that this was politically very, very difficult time. Anyway, he is sent off in 1784, by the Continental Congress, because he speaks fluent French and he's a classy kind of guy, and they send him off to Paris to join Ben Franklin and John Adams, who were already there and have been there since the time of negotiating the final Treaty of Paris that acknowledges by the British American independence. He doesn't leave until 1789. Just soon after the French rose up and took the Bastille prison from the king and began, Bastille Day, the French Independence Day, and the French Revolution. And Jefferson was totally enamored. He compared in his own mind the valor of the American War of Independence and say, what valor? I mean, in Washington, Jefferson, I didn't see that valor in you. Oh, but whatever. He sees this in the French now duplicating the effort of the Americans, not realizing, because he's a humanist, and we'll get into that very soon. Fancy ideas don't bring people to a no understanding about and an ability to go at life. This is going to be tricky. You think the American situation's tricky. This French situation is far trickier. And unfortunately for Jefferson, he just found it impossible to come to terms with everything he dreamed and hoped for. Oh, he was praised the French Revolution. Even when they started getting news that even his old friends are being butchered now, the French are killing everybody. They've killed off the king. They've killed off the bishops and archbishops and the aristocracy. Now they're killing each other off. And his reaction is, oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Breaks my heart. But if we're ever going to reach what is the French, we will have to clean house. And if even there's just an Adam and Eve surviving, we rebuild. Jefferson, what kind of a monster are you? But he's such an idealist, such a humanist. He believes that the naturalness of the dynamic that he lived in would suddenly bring the French by some kind of, I don't know what idea, but that's the one he lived by, that would bring them to goodness of their own by nature. By nature? Man's nature. Well, Washington had a very different view of man's nature than Jefferson did, which is a problem, by the way, we have today. We've got a lot of Jeffersonians out there trying to run this country. Ooh, ah. Anyway, sorry, I breathed too heavily. He was brought back. He was expecting to go back to Paris, but he was brought back by Washington with the invitation to become his Secretary of State. Oh, that's an important position. Why? Well, Jefferson, they're both Virginians, and it's still some dignity to the idea of public service, and he has that dignity. Only problem is he and Washington are going to soon disagree vitally over foreign policy, which is supposedly Jefferson's realm of action as Secretary of State, but Washington is listening more to Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of Treasury, than he is to Jefferson. And that just infuriates Jefferson so much that he quits. Because Hamilton and Washington, even though they'd fought the British, realized that in the post-independence or in the new independence era, it still served American interests better to work more favorably towards the British than towards the French, especially given what the heck was going on in France. Which Jefferson, like I said, lived in some kind of idealized universe. And Jefferson just couldn't handle not being the one that Washington looked to. And in fact, he would form a political party whose sole purpose was to bring Washington down. Now, you never hear that about Jefferson, but that's what he dedicated himself to with his Republican Party, which, by the way, has nothing to do with today's Republican Party. It is a forerunner of today's Democratic Party. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. They understand the Jeffersonian legacy on that side of the aisle, okay? So anyway, he does, with his political party, he does himself run for the presidency in the 1800. Actually, he ran for it in 1796, but tied in his vote, sort of, with the guy who was supposed to be his vice president, Aaron Burr, because they didn't distinguish a vote for president and vice president when they voted. Both of them won. But it was intended clearly that Burr was to be the vice president, Jefferson was to be the president. Anyway, he finally, in the year 1800, becomes president. Oh, I got a lot of stuff, but I'm not. He wasn't a bad president. He just wasn't a great president. And in fact, in his last year, he really crippled the American economy by putting an embargo on American imports and exports to all foreign countries, because this would keep us neutral in the constant conflict going on between the British and the French. And there was almost no way to avoid it. So he decides to shut down the American economy. And thankfully, it helped the Federalists who were struggling. The Federalists were Washington and Hamilton's party. Get back in power enough to cancel that in March 1809. Anyway, it wasn't something that Jefferson wanted to call off, even after it was a complete failure. All right, that's Jefferson as our great, glorious leader. Yes? Well, after that, one of the things he wanted to see on his epitaph was his other great feature was to create the University of Virginia, a competitor to, guess what? William and Mary, the college that he went to. And it is not going to teach theology. There are no theological professors. There is going to be a department of philosophy in which the issue of God will be discussed, but that's as far as, because not only did Jefferson create the university, he also created the curriculum. But this was a man of ideas. And men of ideas love to tell everybody else how they should think and what they should. What?
His own Bible too. He wrote it.
Oh yes. He re-edited. I'm sorry. I'm going to move this down closer to the belly button. Ah.
You understand.
All right. So, anyway, oddly enough, he dies on July the 4th, 1826, the same day that John Adams, who by that time, from originally being hostile enemies, once they're both out of power, they find out that they actually share similar ideas about a whole bunch of issues. I'm not going to get into Adams. And oddly enough, they both die on the same day. Okay. Just a little about Jefferson's home at Monticello. Construction began in 1768 on 5,000 acres and 52 slaves when Jefferson was 26. Five, sorry. He moved in 2 years later, but he would undertake deep remodeling after 1793. That is after he resigned from Washington's cabinet. Because he wanted to build the place of perfect habitation, which, by the way, besides the French wine, bankrupted him so badly that when he died, even all of his talk about, ending slavery, the slaves had to be sold off to pay off the debts that all of his idealistic world had. Does that also sound familiar about today's politics? Great intentions, but economic realities and great intentions don't usually work very well together. And here's his University of Virginia, designed by Jefferson, including the curriculum, with construction undertaken in 1819, 10 years after his presidency. Okay, here's the other dude, George Washington, 1732 to December 1790. Almost made it into the next century, but not quite. All right. 1743, his father Abraham dies when Washington was only 11, ending his possibility of formal education. His mom was Abraham's second wife, and so he had some older stepbrothers, and one of those is very importantly Lawrence. He didn't come very close to his brother Lawrence. He didn't care for his mom much. She didn't remarry, as was supposed to be the case back then when you were widowed. She preferred to stay in charge, and he didn't like that too much. Anyway, 1752, his half-brother Lawrence dies. George takes his place in the scheme of things. Lawrence was well considered in the, as a commander, military commander in the Virginia Reserves, the Virginia Regiment. And so Washington's now considerably younger than his brother, takes the step into that same world of military service. Okay? Now, also, since he didn't get a formal education, he was also very self-taught. His English, reading and writing are okay, nothing exceptional. His math was outstanding, and he taught himself surveying, which was a very prestigious job back then, especially since the frontiers were unknown and they needed terribly the services of surveyors. And Washington, consequently, got to learn a whole lot about the wild, wild West and the Indians that lived there. And so you can see he becomes also a kind of a natural pick for the Virginia governance to have him ultimately take larger and larger command of the Virginia Reserves. I keep saying reserves, regiment, because they're having troubles on the frontier. All right? So slowly but surely, through just doggedness, there's no Washington plan or program. It's just he takes the opportunities as they are open to him on a regular basis to take the next step. Unlike Jefferson, whose universe is planned out, Washington's world is always in response. By the way, both men were people of prayer, but you can picture what they prayed about. Jefferson, oh Lord, make my dreams come true, make my designs come to perfection. Washington's was, Lord, help me survive this conflict that faces me. I trust you to help me and show me what I need to do next, because I haven't got a clue. Those are two they're both prayers, yes? Be careful, which prayer we're hearing constantly. There are Christian prayers of reason. Lord, be reasonable. Do what I want you to do. Give me prosperity. Well, maybe. I don't know. The first 3 centuries of Christianity wasn't about prosperity, was it? No. Okay, back to George, who I like a lot, all right? Sorry, this is a very prejudiced sermon or whatever this thing is. It's not a sermon. I like Washington. Jefferson, anyway, in I'd read better then. 1753, one of his first tasks is to be sent into the wilderness to negotiate some kind of understanding with the Indians and the French, who were allied together, about what the heck the disposition of the Ohio River Valley was. Virginia at that time considered that part of their territory. And he knew the land, he knew the ways. And okay, so now he's off and running in that direction. But very soon thereafter, all of this tension breaks out into war. It's called the 7 Years' War in Europe because it lasts 7 years over there, but it's called the French and Indian War, which gets a 3-year head start. So their 7-year war and our French and Indian War are the same one, except that there's a little spread between the two. We get going on this, on the frontier, fighting French and Indians, yes? The same ones that George knows something about. He doesn't do well with General Braddock, the British general. He goes to take on the French and the Indians. Indians are not people you want to fight back then. If they won, there was no surrender. You got butchered. That was just the rules of warfare in the Indian world. Because unless they took you for slavery, Indians had no use for a defeated person. The reason they were fighting you was they wanted you off the land so they could have the land. So I mean, they weren't going to keep you around. They're going to dispose of you. Oh, those nasty Indians. No, it was just the law of nature. Okay? It's just the law of nature. But this is what they were up against. Anyway, General Braddock is killed. It's a total mess. Washington had gone in to put a fortress there to kind of, lay claim for the British to that realm, and it didn't quite work. The war drags on. He's back out again. This time he has a little more success in defeating the French at a particular battle. That's at Fort Duquesne, which brings a notice that he's a serious military man. Defeat doesn't seem to stop him. In fact, victory tends more to be the case of putting Washington out of the business. Once he finally has a success, he decides to retire and become a gentleman farmer on his Mount Vernon home. I'm starting to lose people. I'm sorry. He marries a widowed Martha Custis, who brings into that marriage, she was a year older than him, she's a widow, quite a bit of land and more slaves. He'd inherited slaves. Now, 1775, we are now in full military engagement with the British. The war has begun. The Battle of Boston, Bunker Hill and all that has taken place. John Adams, clever Massachusetts delegate to the Continental Congress, asked the Continental Congress to make Washington the commander of their continental forces, much to the chagrin of many of the other generals who thought they were more qualified. Some of them had served in the British Army regularly and higher up. But of course, from Adams' point of view, it was a way of making sure Virginia, by having a Virginia leader, because up until this point it was basically a New England rebellion. Virginia was still kind of deciding whether it wanted to rise up in rebellion against the king, who was the head of the Church of England and all their world. That was a pretty tough decision. Putting Washington at the head of the Continental Army was a cool move. John Adams has no idea how cool that was. That was an act of God, by the way. A lot of the other generals didn't have the same character that Washington had. Washington truly understood that he was called to service. The others were called to opportunity to make names for themselves. Well, it happens, doesn't it? Power, position. As far as Washington goes, he'd just as soon be at home as a gentleman farmer. That's plenty of prestige for him. But he's called to duty, and so duty it is. That is something he has to answer to God for, and will do so constantly. And he's known to be a man of prayer. His soldiers are known to be under the compulsion of themselves to be also men of prayer, because battles, as he himself knows, can go any old which way. You have got all kinds of battle plans and in mind, but once, as I like to say, the first shot is fired, it can go anywhere. And how things work out is like, whoa. You better be prepared to move quickly left or right or up and down and hope that God is with you, because there's nothing else working here in this dynamic. Anyway, he doesn't do well. I showed you the picture of what happens in 1776 when he's chased out of New York City and almost destroyed there. He goes into winter quarters and realizes that he's about to lose his army. It's down to 5,000 troops at this point against 30,000 British. This is not going well. And a lot of them have no plans to re-enlist for that new year. They go home. This is a rebellion that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. What does he do? Most brazen thing possible. Again, and I'm positive. He was not somebody who talked privately about his religious life. But those around him knew it and understood how he worked and how he went at things. It was under the standing that God was going to have to provide. So he marches. Well, sort of partly marches and partly floats his troops across the Delaware River and invades Trenton and completely catches by surprise a Hessian outfit there who surrenders. And then he marches north to Princeton, which is just a short while north, which I know quite well because I used to run between those two towns, and defeats the British there. And then they go into winter quarters. And his men sign up again. Next summer ain't all that much better. He's called on to protect Philadelphia, which was the capital at that time of the Continental Congress. They all got to flee. He fights at Germantown. That doesn't go well. But Washington's not going to quit. And at Valley Forge, they go into winter quarters in which he lost half of his soldiers in the dire conditions. But those that did survive were a very different breed. That's just down the hill here a little ways, right? Valley Forge. And they came out they have their opportunity in June of the next year to come upon Clinton as he's moving his troops out of Philadelphia and back to New York, to come up behind him and clobber him. And he has trouble with General Lee, who is one of the jealous types of generals that did everything they could to undercut, even though he's supposed to be taking command. All right, I'm not going to get into that. That's a great, I love these war stories, but we don't have time. And as a consequence, instead of a great victory, it's a draw. But at least it's a draw between his troops and the British forces. Come on. And with that, the British decide that they should have gone south to Virginia and the Carolinas to begin with, because the rebellion there was not that, firmly planted in the hearts and minds of the people as it was in New England. So that pretty much ends the British effort in the north. They now concentrate on the south. Washington is not that involved until Yorktown. When Cornwallis is moving his troops back out of the south, they've defeated a lot of the southern armies, although this Swamp Fox guy keeps giving him trouble no end. And so he comes up to Yorktown, which is on the river up. I know it because I go there. Used to go. Well, anyway, and he's going to get supplied by British ships coming in and because he's run out of food and supplies. Well, God bless the French. As far as I know, it's the only time the French Navy defeated the British Navy. Woo! That was an act of God. As a consequence, the British cannot get in to relieve Cornwallis, who's now stuck at Yorktown because Lafayette leading French troops and Washington leading American troops have the town surrounded. What does Cornwallis have to do? Surrender. And folks, that's it. That's the end of the war. Word gets back to Lord North. Oh, Lord, it's over. Boy, it was over. Okay, so the war's over. I'm sorry. I could go. Yeah, next time. Yeah.
Tell us about Jefferson's Bible.
About Jefferson's Bible? You want to know about Jefferson's Bible? Okay, Jefferson cut out all the miracle stories because he thought that those had been added, to embellish Jesus. He loved Jesus as a sort of like a Socrates, a great moral instructor. But a miracle worker, oh come on, that first of all, anything in the Bible that can't be answered by scientific reason, he has to discard because it's just imagination, it's embellishment, it's nothing but lies. And so in order to purify the Bible, he's going to cut out all of the miracle stories. So he reduces Jesus down to simply, he's a Unitarian, of course. Not as the Son of God, but as a great philosopher. What? I'm sorry.
Bill is Unitarian. Was Unitarian.
Oh, yeah, but it's true. Unitarian is, and Jefferson was, Jefferson really truly believed that within his lifetime or shortly thereafter, all young men would be Unitarians because we were coming into an age of reason. And obviously, to be reasonable, you had to be a Unitarian. That Trinitarian stuff, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, was a bunch of Greek mysticism that somehow God itself and needed to be cleansed and purged out of Christianity. I'm way off the subject here, but that's okay. See, I'm a teacher. I'm not a preacher. Okay, what have I got? Here's my point because I got, 3 minutes to make it? I could give you personal testimony because as a university professor, I was a Thomas Jefferson, and that didn't work. And all hell came down, and my world collapsed. And I remember standing out on the back porch at one point saying, God, if you're real, I need to know, and I need to know right now. And, of course, that's all God was waiting for. Wow! And from that point on, I learned, like Washington, before you do anything, pray on it, and then wait. And if it's right immediately in front of you, take a step in faith into it anyway, because you're now God's agent. Doesn't mean the problems go away. It doesn't mean prosperity gospel has rescued you into Jeffersonian, Monticello-like perfection. Hey, sorry, life continues to go on. Challenges come at you. Ask the first century Christians about that. But if life is an apprenticeship to eternity, there's a purpose to all of this, and don't avoid it. This is part of God's intention in raising human nature in the first place, is to see us respond to dynamics that are going to divide us. I was going to talk a little bit about Job. You know, God letting the devil go out and, mess with our minds. He certainly got Job's wife. No, honey, you need to be more rational and reasonable. Job said, no, I think I'll stay with faith in God, even though none of it makes any sense. An awful lot of times for you Christians, for us Christians, life isn't going to make sense, but that's not the point. It's not about making sense. It's about being able to move forward in faith against all kinds of adversity, which is most unreasonable most of the time, in getting a job done. That's Christianity as Washington understood it. That's the way I understand it. That's the way Remy understands it. It's the way everybody, I think all of you understand it, I hope. That you are called, like Washington, to duty, service of Jesus Christ, to show a world how to cope. And it ain't found in Washington, D.C.'s Monticellos that they promise you. They ain't going to come anyway, and you don't want them if they do, because you'll lose your faith sitting there and basking in the pleasure of nothing to do, and bored out of your mind, and all of the games on the internet are not even satisfying you anymore. You are bored to tears. It's because you're not taking on any challenges in life anymore. Right, Paul? Paul got so successful, he's bored. So what's he going to do? He's going to take on olive oil. Well, why not, right? Life is intended to be a challenge, not a grand, pleasant success. So the pursuit of happiness part, kind of qualify that a little, okay? Yeah, it's written into our Declaration of Independence. Be careful of the pursuit of happiness, okay? Voila, c'est fini. And I'm right on time.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you so much, Miles. See, I cannot tell all those history facts. I am, compared to Miles, very limited on things like that. So that's why we have him. Well, that's why we have him tell those stories as he does, because, and we're going to use him while he's still on earth here for certain events like this, so that especially the younger generation will understand the truth behind certain things. Anyway, thank you so much again, Miles. Thank you for all those information, for all that work that you did on it. Appreciate it. And it's online, so now we can send it to people too.